So as we start to take a look at data warehouses and how they impact organizations, we can start to see that those data warehouses end up becoming a single version of the truth that members within the organization can use to drive decision-making type products. Let's take, for example, this idea of improve cost of quality. And let's say that that every time a customer complaint comes in, that an organization might be able to determine how much money it would cost if that organization does or does not respond to that quality complaint. With that, they can prioritize looking at the cost of poor quality, identify situations faster and prioritize those so that way they can determine which quality issues they will resolve first. So the only way they can do this is have an organizational data warehouse that they can pull data from. And this creates that whole simple idea of data-driven decision making. So that data warehouse helps support that simple concept. Now let's move forward and take a look at our basic data warehouse framework. Typically, on the far left-hand side, we have data sources. These are very common sources. We have our enterprise resource planning database. We have a legacy database, a point-of-sale database, and other web databases, and maybe some external data that might be something like a spreadsheet that a customer service person might have. Right? This typically has to go through some kind of process, which we'll learn about more. It's called the ETL process. It's for extract, transform, and load. So that way that data from the data sources can get into our data warehouse. And this may be replicated multiple times. Now that data warehouse data may help feed our data marts for marketing, operations, finance, and so forth. Or people that want to use this data can probably access that data without any kind of data mart whatsoever. On the far right-hand side are our decision makers. These are where our people are. And they have some kind of application where they might do some reporting, data mining, look at some online analytical processing, or something custom. And they interact with this middleware to either access the data marts or the no data marts whatsoever and go straight to the data warehouse. So this is our generic framework. Keep in mind this framework illustrates dependent data marts. What this means is those data marts here are dependent on that data warehouse. Now, we have several architectures. And I've kind of flipped this around a little bit. I put the user first. So here on the left-hand side, we have what we call Tier 1, which is the users, the decision makers. And then the second tier is the application server. And this is typically the data warehouse or the data mart. And this has the software on it that the client can use to access that data. The last tier is our data sources. This is simply the ERP, the web, Salesforce.com as an example, some kind of customer resource management. This is our third tier. This is where we acquire our data. And so I have a little diagram at the bottom. I think this diagram simplifies what's posted above a little bit cleaner. So we have our users, we have our data warehouse or data marts, and then we have our data sources. When we look at these architectures, we can also break these down into a two-tier generic, where a two-tier generic where the user may access the data warehouse, but the data warehouse and the data acquisition are in the same tier. And then alternatively, we have an independent data mart where the data marts might pull from the data sources, not from the data warehouse. And this is part of its own tier, and then the users draw from those data marts. Now, is it possible to have a one-tier architecture? The short answer is yes, but those are very small-scale type of data warehouses. And they're usually not enterprise-wide. Right? So it's important to know all three of these architectures. So we have a 3-tier architecture. Then we have two-tier architectures. And the difference between these two tiers is that in one tier, the user is connecting to the data warehouse that is connecting to the data sources. And in the other tier, the user is connecting to data marts that's connecting to data sources. Also, you can have web-based architectures where you might have your data warehouse and it's connected to some web server, and that web server is what connects the client. We're not going to worry too much about web-based architectures as we move forward. And here are some other alternates. And a lot of these alternates vary based on how the data warehouses and the data marts have been changed around. Each of these architectures will have some benefit and also some detriment as well. And you might want to ask yourself which one is the best, and I will tell you that the one that works the best is the one that meets the organizational needs the best. So considering data warehouse architectures, you have to be thinking about what kind of database management system you're going to use, what type of processing they're going to be using, migration tools that could be used, and what also tools can be used for data retrieval and analysis. In this course, we're typically using Microsoft tools, but we can also use other tools. For example, our database management system that we're using in this course is SQL Server Management Studio. And what we are doing is we're going to be using SQL Server integration services for our migration tools, right? And also SQL Server Management Studio will help us with retrieval and somewhat of our analysis. Our analysis will actually be done with analysis services. I'm not quite familiar with the way that we're set up with our processing. I would say at the current time, we are using parallel processing in our servers to be able to analyze our data. Here are 10 factors that can affect the architectural selection decision. Starting from the bottom, social, political issues, technical issues, the ability of the IT staff, compatibility with existing systems, and also the strategic view of the data warehouse for the organization. Other constraints that might be on the system, also the type of people that will be using the system in the end. What the urgency is, a lot of times people might go for what's quick and not necessarily what's fast or best. And also, what type of information does upper management need? And of course, the number one is the interdependencies between organizational units and departments. All of these things need to be into consideration when thinking about what type of architecture is best for an organization. And I would dare say that the smaller the organization would probably go with maybe a 2-tier type of design. Probably an independent data mart might be a small organization, where more enterprise data warehousing would be for larger organizations. So that concludes our discussion on data warehouses. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.